Hey friends, tonight we begin a journey, not just through the pages of history, but through the ancient dreams of humanity itself. These are the myths that shaped empires, the kings who walked with gods, the vanished cities buried beneath centuries of silence. Before we unravel this epic tapestry, take a moment if you find calm here. If these stories guide you gently into rest, to like the video and subscribe to the channel, only if it feels right for you. And let me know in the comments, where are you tuning in from and what time is it as you begin your journey with us. It's always a quiet joy to see this growing global circle of dreamers and history lovers. Now dim the lights. Maybe switch on a fan or some soft rain sounds in the background and let your breath settle. The ancient world is waiting. Let's ease into tonight's voyage together. Close your eyes. Let the noise of the present fall away. You are stepping into a tapestry of time, a quiet voyage across millennia. From the chasms of myth to the halls of ancient kings, and into the quiet echo of forgotten empires, tonight you will drift through history, softly told and deeply remembered. Let the weight of the day leave your shoulders. Breathe, and let's begin. Long before kings or calendars, before the rise of cities or the carving of laws into stone, there were stories. These stories lived not in books or scrolls, but in voices, the whispered wisdom of elders, the solemn chants of priests, and the songs of wandering poets who gazed into the night sky and found gods among the stars. In the hush between heartbeats, when the fire cracked low and the wind whispered against the walls of early shelters, humanity's oldest memories stirred, tales that reached across generations, cultures, and continents, seeking not only to explain the world, but to comfort the soul. Every civilization had its beginning, and within each beginning was a myth, vast, luminous, and trembling with the breath of the divine. In ancient Greece, the universe began with chaos, a dark and formless void, silent and infinite. Out of this emptiness came Gaia, the earth, solid and nurturing, and Uranus, the sky, vast and majestic. Together they birthed the Titans, great elemental beings who roamed the early cosmos. Cronus, the most cunning among them, overthrew his father Uranus at Gaia's urging, using a jagged sickle made of divine flint. From Uranus's blood spilled onto the earth came the Furies, the giants, and Aphrodite, who rose from the seas. Foam in a glimmering shell, Cronus seized power, yet feared prophecy, a voice that warned one of his children would overthrow him. In terror, he swallowed each newborn, Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. But Rhea, grieving, wrapped a stone in swaddling cloth and gave it to Cronus instead of her last child, Zeus, who she hid on the island of Crete, nurtured by the goat, Amalthea, and guarded by the Curates warriors who clashed their shields. To drown out the infant's cries, Zeus grew in strength and wisdom. When the time came, he returned to challenge Cronus, giving him a potion that caused him to regurgitate Zeus's siblings. Together, they waged the Titanomachy, a great war that shook the heavens. The war raged for 10 years. Mountains cracked, oceans boiled, and stars trembled in their constellations. The Titans fought with raw primordial power, but Zeus freed the Hecatonchires, 100-handed giants, and the Cyclopes, who forged thunderbolts for him. These weapons turned the tide. When the dust settled, the Titans were cast into Tartarus, a chasm deeper than the abyss. guarded by the monster camp. Zeus divided the world, he ruled the sky. Poseidon claimed the sea, and Hades took the underworld. Olympus rose as a palace above the clouds, where gods feasted, loved, argued, and occasionally descended into mortal affairs. Athena, goddess of wisdom, sprang fully armed from Zeus's skull. Hephaestus limped from Hera's womb, shunned for his deformity, yet destined to forge wonders. Dionysus brought wine and madness. Prometheus, the trickster and friend of man, stole fire and gifted it to humanity. For this defiance, Zeus chained him to a crag, where an eagle devoured his liver each day, only for it to regrow by night to the south. Along the life-giving Nile, the people of Kemet spoke of a world born from none, the infinite waters. From these still depths emerged Adam, the first being, who brought forth Shu, god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. Together they gave birth to Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky, who were lovers until Shu separated them to create space for the world. Nut arched above Geb, her starry body forming the sky. Their children were Osiris, Isis, Set, and Nephthys. Osiris became king and taught agriculture, governance, and ritual. Beloved by all, he was envied by his brother Set, who tricked him into a coffin and cast it into the Nile. Isis, his wife and sister, journeyed across Egypt to retrieve his body. With Anubis and Thoth, she reassembled him, and through magic and devotion, conceived Horus. Osiris descended to the underworld as its ruler, weighing souls against Mat-'s feather of truth. Horus, raised in secret, grew into a falconite warrior who battled, Set in the desert's heat and the delta's reeds, each dual shaping Egypt's future. Pharaohs reigned as Horus in life, and Osiris in death, their rule bound by Mat, the eternal balance of justice, truth, and cosmic order in the Fertile Crescent, where the rivers Tigris and Euphrates gave birth to civilization. The people of Sumer and Babylon spoke of a time before time. In the beginning were Apsu, the fresh waters, and Tiamat, the salt sea, who mingled in the darkness to birth the first gods. But these gods were noisy, disruptive, and Apsu sought to destroy them. Ea, a god of wisdom and trickery, slew Apsu, enraging Tiamat, who raised an army of chaos, dragons, serpents, and chimeras, and chose Kingu as her champion. Marduk, Ea's son, stepped forward, with a net, storm winds, and blazing eyes. He defeated Tiamat, splitting her body in two to create the heavens and earth. From Kingu's blood he formed humanity, fragile, mortal, and tasked with serving the gods through worship and labor. Marduk organized the stars, ordained time, and built Babylon as his throne on earth. The ziggurats rose as ladders to the divine, and tablets were etched with laws and poems, among them the Epic of Gilgamesh, the tale of a king who sought immortality and learned the sorrow and beauty of being human. Far to the east, in the lands of the Indus and Ganges, the Vedic rishis composed hymns in the language of fire and light. The cosmos was a vast cycle, an endless wheel. Creation began not with a singular act, but with sacrifice. The cosmic being, Purusha, offered himself, and from his body emerged the world. His head became the sky, his feet the earth, his breath the wind, and from him came the castes and seasons. Later, Hindu cosmology would speak of the Trimurti, Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the destroyer. Time flowed in yugas, the Satya Yuga of truth, the Treta Yuga of valor, the Dvapara Yuga of decline, and the Kali Yuga of darkness. In each age, Vishnu descended in avatars: Matsya, the fish who saved Manu from a great flood; Rama, the ideal prince; Krishna, the flute-playing god of love and war. Shiva danced the Tandava, his steps forging creation and destruction alike. Parvati, in her forms as Durga and Kali, guarded the world and vanquished demons. The whispered that all things are one, that the self-Atman is not separate from Brahman, the boundless reality beyond form. To awaken was to dissolve illusion and return to truth. Across the steppes of Central Asia, the Scythians spoke of a Sky Father and Earth Mother. The Slavs worshipped Perun, the Thunderer, and Vels, the god of cattle and the underworld, locked in an eternal struggle. In the forests of northern Europe, the Norse sang of Yggdrasil, the world tree, whose roots touched hell and whose branches held Asgard. Odin, the Allfather, sacrificed his eye for wisdom, hanging from the tree for 9 nights to learn the runes. Thor, with his hammer, Mjolnir, defended Midgard from giants. Loki schemed and twisted fate, and Ragnarok loomed, the twilight of the gods. When fire and ice would clash, the sun and moon be devoured, and the world submerged beneath waves, before rising anew. In China, the mythic figure Pengu cracked open the cosmic egg with an axe, separating yin and yang, heaven and earth. As he grew, he held them apart, and when he died, his body became the world, his eyes the sun and moon, his breath the wind, his voice thunder. Nua, the serpent-bodied goddess, molded humans from clay, and when the heavens were damaged by chaos, she repaired them with stones of 5 colors. The Jade Emperor reigned above, the Dragon Kings ruled the seas, and immortals walked mountain paths seeking the elixir of life. In Japan, the kami Izanagi and Izanami stirred the ocean with a jeweled spear, and from the droplets that fell, the islands of Japan were born. Their children included Amaterasu, goddess of the sun, who once hid in a cave, plunging the world into darkness until coaxed out by a dance. Her descendant became the first emperor, and thus divine lineage flowed through blood and sword in Africa. The Dogon of Mali spoke of Namo, the first being created by the sky god Amma, a water spirit who descended in a whirl of sound. In West Africa, the Yoruba told of Olodumare and Orisha, divine intermediaries like Ogun, god of iron, and Ocean, goddess of rivers and love. Stories were not fixed. They danced with the griot's drums, changed with each telling, yet held deep truths. In the Americas, the Aztecs believed the world had been created and destroyed multiple times. In the 5th sun, humans were shaped from the bones of the dead and the blood of the gods. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, brought knowledge and maize. In the Popol Vuh of the Maya, the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, played ball against the lords of Xibalba, the underworld, tricking death and rising into the sky. In the Arctic, the Inuit spoke of Sedna, goddess of the sea, who lost her fingers in betrayal, and from them sprang seals and whales. In Australia, the dream time stretched beyond time, where ancestral spirits sang the land into being. Each rock and river a verse in an eternal song. Myths were not mere tales, they were blueprints of the soul, maps of memory, and prayers for continuity. They taught that fire was sacred, that death had purpose, that the sun returned because a god wrote it, or died for it, or danced it across the sky. They taught humility before the vastness of the cosmos and offered meaning amid suffering. They reminded mortals that the divine walked among them in storms, in trees, in love, and in fear, and they endure still, in stone and scripture, in lullabies and liturgies, whispering, "Remember who you are and where you came from." In the long shadow of the myths, as the dawn of gods gave way to the light of civilization, the world saw the emergence of kings, rulers who claimed divine right, wielded the sword and the scepter, and bound earth to heaven through sacred authority. These kings were not merely leaders of men, they were mediators between the mortal and divine, chosen to preserve order in a world ever tilting toward chaos. The line between king and god blurred, and from that line rose temples, laws, cities, and legacies carved in stone. As agriculture took root and rivers began to nurture great populations, the sacred kingship became the central pillar of governance across the ancient world. In the ancient river valleys of Mesopotamia, cradle of civilization, the kings of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria derived their right to rule from divine favor. The concept of the me, decrees handed down by the gods, governed everything from kingship to craftsmanship. The city-states of Uruk, Lagash, and Ur were dominated by ziggurats, stair-stepped temples where priests interceded with the gods, and kings administered justice. The Epic of Gilgamesh, inscribed in cuneiform on clay tablets, tells of a semi-divine king who sought eternal life after the death of his friend Enkidu. It is a story of kingship, mortality, and the search for meaning, themes echoed across civilizations. Gilgamesh was no mere conqueror. He was a priest, a judge, and a bridge between divine will and human suffering. Sargon of Akkad, who united the Sumerian city-states under one rule around 2334 BCE, claimed the goddess Inanna as his patron. His grandson Naram-Sin declared himself a god, stamping divine iconography into his image. To govern was to act in cosmic harmony, and to defy the gods invited ruin. To the west, Egypt perfected sacred kingship into a divine institution. The pharaoh was both man and god, Horus on earth and Osiris in death. His every act sustained Mat, the divine balance of truth, justice, and cosmic order. From the early dynasties of Memphis to the grandeur of Thebes, the king performed daily rituals in vast temples, consulted oracles, and oversaw massive projects from pyramids to obelisks. The pyramid texts speak of the king's ascent to the stars. The coffin texts and Book of the Dead chart his passage through the underworld. Kingship in Egypt was deeply ritualized. Hatshepsut, a woman, adopted full pharaonic regalia and commissioned temples and trade expeditions. Akhenaten introduced a monotheistic cult to Aten, the sun disk, fundamentally altering the religious structure, only to be reversed by his successor, Tunkamen. The Ramesside pharaohs emphasized divine warriorship, with scenes of smiting enemies etched into stone as sacred performance. India's early urban centers, such as those in the Indus Valley, left behind no clear names of kings, but their orderly streets, granaries, and sanitation systems point to structured governance. Later, the Vedic kings' rayons gained legitimacy through ritual sacrifice. The Rajasuya and Ashvamedha rituals bound the king's power to divine favor. The Mahabharata, an epic of dynastic strife, reflects the complexities of dharma and kingship embodied in characters like Yudhishthira, who sacrifices everything for righteousness. Rama, the prince of Ayodhya in the Ramayana, embodies the ideal ruler, just, wise, loyal, and obedient to dharma above all. In historical India, the Mauryan emperor Ashoka, after witnessing the horrors of war at Kalinga, embraced Buddhism and declared a new kingship of compassion and moral governance. His edicts, carved into pillars and rocks across the subcontinent, emphasized tolerance, non-violence, and welfare, an imperial voice of conscience. In ancient China, kingship was a heavenly contract. The Shang dynasty traced its authority through ancestor worship and divination. Oracle bones, used to divine the future, linked rulers to the spirit world. The transition to the Zhou dynasty introduced the concept of the mandate of heaven. A ruler held power so long as he ruled justly. Natural disasters, rebellion, or corruption signaled heaven's displeasure. Thus, kingship came with moral weight. The Son of Heaven was not divine himself, but the chosen steward of harmony between the realms. Rituals were performed to honor heaven, earth, and ancestors, with seasonal ceremonies ensuring agricultural prosperity. Later, Confucian philosophy formalized this moral model of rulership, elevating virtue, filial piety, and ethical governance as the hallmarks of true kingship. In Mesoamerica, kings were embodiments of divine cycles. The Maya king, or Aja, was both astronomer and priest, orchestrating rituals aligned with celestial movements. Bloodletting was essential. The king offered his own blood to maintain cosmic order. Cities like Tikal, Palenque, and Copan were political and religious centers, with stele recording dynastic histories, battles, and rituals. King Pakel of Palenque, buried in a jade mask, was glorified as a cosmic traveler. The Aztecs of central Mexico saw their rulers as the intermediaries who kept the sun moving. Human sacrifice was not cruelty, but necessity. The gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and humans returned the debt. Moctezuma II's rule witnessed both imperial expansion and the fateful arrival of the Spanish, a clash of sacred and secular, of two worlds interpreting kingship through entirely different lenses. In the Andean highlands, the Inca emperors, Sapa Incas, were sons of Inti, the sun god. Cusco was their sacred center, designed as a puma. Its heart, the Coricancha temple, where golden walls reflected the sun's power. Inca kings were divine, their mummified bodies kept in palaces, fed and consulted long after death. Each new ruler had to build his own palace and conquests, since the estates of past kings remained sacred and active. This cyclical, living kingship reinforced the eternal presence of the divine. West Africa also developed powerful models of sacred kingship. The Yoruba kings, or Abas, traced their authority to the god Oduduwa. In Benin, the Abba was a ritual leader and divine channel. His person was sacred, and his word was law. Elaborate bronzes depict the Abba surrounded by courtly figures, warriors, and priests. In Mali, the Mansur ruled over an empire of trade, scholarship, and devotion. Mansur Musa's Hajj to Mecca in the 14th century broadcast his divine favor and bound his rule to the wider Islamic world. Timbuktu, under his successors, became a center of learning, faith, and royal patronage in Europe. Kingship gradually transitioned from divine inheritance to legal authority, but early rulers from the pharaoh-like kings of Crete to the divine Caesar of Rome claimed sacred legitimacy. Alexander the Great consulted oracles, claimed descent from Zuzaman, and adopted Persian divine customs. Roman emperors, after death, were deified, with temples built in their honor. Later, Christian monarchs claimed divine right through anointed coronation, a ritual that bound them to God's will and shielded their rule from human judgment. Charlemagne, crowned by the Pope as Holy Roman Emperor, symbolized this fusion of sacred and secular, church and state. In medieval Europe, coronations were holy sacraments, linking monarchy to divine providence. Even in Japan, the imperial line claimed descent from the sun goddess, Amaterasu. The emperor was both shaman and sovereign. Shinto rituals affirmed the harmony between ruler, nature, and the kami, divine spirits. Though modern Japanese emperors have renounced political power, their symbolic role still traces its roots to this ancient belief. Sacred kingship offered more than rule. It offered meaning. It explained suffering and prosperity, sanctioned laws, and unified peoples through myth and ritual. From the Nile to the Andes, from the Tigris to the Yellow River, humanity has looked to the figure of the king not merely as ruler, but as anchor in a cosmos that ever threatened to unravel. These rulers were more than administrators. They were symbols of continuity, purpose, and the eternal longing to link heaven with earth. Across time, civilizations have risen with brilliance and fallen into silence. Their cities once gleamed beneath the sun, their rulers wielded immense power, and their voices shaped law, art, and faith. But today, many are gone, their remnants buried under forest, sand, or sea. This chapter traces the mystery of those lost empires, from the collapsed bronze cities of the Mediterranean to the jungle-choked metropolises of Central America. From the buried glory of Angkor to the ghost towns of the Sahara, each leaving behind questions, stories, and echoes that still shape the present in the lands surrounding the Aegean Sea. During the Late Bronze Age, a network of palatial civilizations blossomed: Mycenaean Greece, Minoan Crete, the Hittites of Anatolia, and the rich coastal cities of the Levant. Like Ugarit, they traded with one another, shared languages and artistic motifs, and inscribed their ambitions into tablets and temples. Yet, around 1200 BCE, this interconnected world unraveled. Cities were sacked and burned, trade routes vanished, and entire writing systems disappeared. Ugarit's clay tablets record the last desperate pleas of a king unanswered. The Mycenaean palaces, once home to kings like Agamemnon and warriors immortalized in Homer's epics, collapsed into silence. Scholars debate the cause: the sea peoples, climate shifts, internal revolts, or a system's collapse in which complexity itself led to fragility. From this destruction, a dark age followed, but also a rebirth, for in the ruins, seeds of future cultures stirred. In the jungles of Central America, the Maya civilization crafted vast cities aligned with celestial movements. Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Copan, these were cities of astronomer priests and warrior kings, their histories carved on stelae and their temples rising above the treetops. By the 9th century CE, however, many major centers in the southern lowlands were abandoned. The great plazas emptied, the carved histories ceased, and the jungle reclaimed the stone. What caused this collapse? Some blame a long and brutal drought. Others point to ecological overreach, warfare, or the failure of sacred kingship. Yet this was not an extinction. The Maya people endured, migrating, adapting, and still living across Guatemala, Belize, Mexico, and Honduras. Their traditions, languages, and cosmologies carry forward echoes of the ancient world in the high Andes of South America. Near Lake Titicaca, the city of Tiwanaku rose as a center of stonework and spirituality. Flourishing from about 500 to 1000 CE, its builders erected monoliths and sun gates, drained wetlands for agriculture, and expanded a sacred cosmology that would influence the Inca centuries later. Tiwanaku fell mysteriously, possibly due to drought or shifting trade, but its legacy endured in Inca myth and ritual. To the north, the Mocha built adobe pyramids, painted vivid murals of gods and sacrifices, and engineered canals to water their desert coast. Their disappearance may have followed El Niño weather patterns or internal social collapse. These were civilizations intimately tied to their environment, and when the balance tipped, so did their survival. In Southeast Asia, the Khmer Empire's heart was Angkor, a sprawling urban complex of temples, reservoirs, and cosmic geometry. At its peak in the 12th century, Angkor housed hundreds of thousands of people. Angkor Wat, dedicated to Vishnu and later repurposed for Buddhism, stands as one of humanity's greatest architectural feats. But by the 15th century, Angkor was largely abandoned. Climate instability, flooding, and the failure of water infrastructure likely played roles. The jungle crept in, but it never erased. Cambodians today still revere Angkor as a spiritual and national symbol, proof that even in ruin, sacred centers persist. The Silk Road once stitched together vast empires from China to the Mediterranean. Cities like Merv, Samarkand, and Bactra flourished as hubs of trade, scholarship, and cosmopolitan culture. Yet they too faced decline, often at the hands of invading armies or shifts in trade. Merv was sacked by the Mongols in 1221, losing perhaps hundreds of thousands in a single siege. Desert winds now whisper through its crumbled domes and walls. But archaeological digs continue to uncover glories buried in the sand. In the Tarim Basin, cities like Lulen and Nia were lost to desertification, their Buddhist murals and wooden documents preserved in the dry silence of the Taklamakan Africa. 2. Saw the rise and fall of enigmatic cities. Great Zimbabwe, with its curved granite walls and conical towers, flourished from the 11th to 15th centuries. It was the center of a kingdom that traded gold, ivory, and cattle, reaching as far as the Swahili coast and Arabia. Its abandonment remains debated. Environmental degradation, political shifts, or trade reorientation may have played a role. European colonizers denied its African origins for centuries, but today it stands as a monument to indigenous African statecraft. Farther west, the ancient city of Gengeno in Mali was occupied as early as 250 BCE, built without stone. Its mud brick architecture tells of a sophisticated, urbanized society long before Islam or European contact in the Middle East. Centers like Babylon, Nineveh, and Persepolis crumbled with the fall of empires. Babylon, under Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar II, was a center of law, art, and learning. The Hanging Gardens, if they existed, symbolized imperial power and divine favor. Yet conquest, shifting rivers, and economic decline emptied its zig. Persepolis, jewel of the Achaemenids, was burned by Alexander the Great. Its stone reliefs still speak of imperial grandeur, even as time wears them smooth. Lesser known, but no less significant, are the forgotten cities of the Pacific and Oceania. Nan Madol, a city of basalt pillars rising from a lagoon in Micronesia, was once the ceremonial center of the Sodalur dynasty. Built atop artificial islets, its canals and walls remain a marvel of engineering. The reasons for its decline are cloaked in local legend, tyranny, invasion, or ecological strain. In Rapa Nui, Easter Island, Moai statues gaze inland, built by a society that experienced both cultural flourishing and dramatic change. Overexploitation of resources, combined with external pressures, likely led to societal upheaval. Europe, too, is littered with ruins that whisper of lost ages. The Nuragic civilization of Sardinia left behind hundreds of stone towers called nuraghi, their function still debated. In Scotland, Brock towers rise in mystery. In the Balkans, the Vinca culture predates the pyramids, its script undeciphered, and settlements complex. The Etruscans of Italy built sophisticated cities before Rome, their language fading alongside their autonomy. Even in the American Midwest, cities rose and vanished. Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, was a vast pre-Columbian urban center with pyramidal mounds, wooden palisades, and complex societal structures. At its peak, around 1100 CE, it housed tens of thousands. Its decline may have stemmed from flooding, resource depletion, or social upheaval. Today, mounds remain silent, sentinels of an age before European contact. These lost cities are not merely sites of decay. They are time capsules, preserving the hopes, hierarchies, beliefs, and mistakes of humanity. Some fell from conquest, others from climate. Some were abandoned slowly, others extinguished overnight. Their disappearance reminds us that civilization is fragile and that continuity is a rare gift. Yet in each ruin, in every cracked tablet or moss-covered stone, there is testimony that people once dreamed, ruled, worshipped, and built. Not unlike us, we build temples and roads, empires and economies, thinking they will last. And sometimes they do for a while, but time is patient. Forests return, rivers change course, sands swallow marble. Yet memory persists. In archaeology, in oral traditions, in the dreams of the descendants, the cities rise again. And in the quiet of night, as we drift between sleep and story, we walk their streets once more, barefoot on ancient stone, breathing the forgotten air of kingdoms long vanished. Fire has long been the language of the divine. A whisper in the flame, a flicker in the dark, the symbol of light in a world that once knew only night. In this chapter, we travel to the world's oldest holy places and explore the rites and rituals that ignited early religious experience. The fire altars of India and Iran, the oracle stones of Greece, the temple fires of Mesopotamia, and the sacred hearths of early Europe. These were not merely buildings or customs. These were the flames that lit the soul of civilization. In Göbekli Tepe, a hilltop sanctuary raised over 11,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers gathered not for survival, but for ceremony. Massive stone pillars, carved with foxes, birds, and abstract symbols, form concentric circles that predate Stonehenge by millennia. No homes surrounded this sacred site, only altars and art. Perhaps here, the first flickers of organized spirituality emerged. From Anatolia, we move east to ancient Mesopotamia, where temples called ziggurats rose in tiers toward the sky. Atop these priests tended sacred fires, offered libations, and read omens in stars and smoke. In Uruk and Eridu, the gods were not distant. They had homes, meals, marriages. The temple was not just a place of worship, it was the center of law, writing, medicine, and the calendar. The eternal flame blazed in the service of Inanna and Lil and Marduk. In the highlands of Iran. At fire altars, believed to prefigure Zoroastrian practice, sacred flames were never extinguished. Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic faiths, emerged around the 2nd millennium BCE with a cosmic dualism, light against dark, truth against the lie. The fire temple became a lighthouse of purity, where priests recited hymns in Avestan and kept the flame alive through wind, rain, and war. This fire was Ahura Mazda's breath, eternal and clean. In India, Vedic rituals developed in tandem with the sacred fire, the Agni, forming the link between humans and the heavens. Agni was the mouth of the gods, carrying offerings to the celestial realms. Rituals were elaborate, precise, and sacred. Inanna's fires were lit in geometrically aligned pits, surrounded by mantras and offerings of ghee, grain, and soma. These fires mirrored the sun and the cosmic flame. Even today, the flame is central in Hindu wedding ceremonies, temple pujas, and daily devotion. Further west, in the Aegean world, prophecy came through breath and trance. At Delphi, beneath the slopes of Mount Parnassus, the Pythia, the oracle, priestess of Apollo, inhaled vapors and spoke the future. Her riddling voice echoed from the Adyton, the temple's innermost chamber, where the god's presence stirred through fissures in the earth. Kings and generals, poets and pilgrims, all came to Delphi. The temple of Apollo was both shrine and theater, echoing with hymns, flute music, and chanted odes. Sacred fire was kept burning in the Prytanium, and new colonies would carry it to ignite the hearths of distant cities. In Rome, the Vestal virgins tended the hearth flame of Vesta, goddess of the home. Chosen as children and sworn to chastity, the Vestals held power and privilege. Their flames symbolized the eternal heart of Rome. If it went out, it foretold catastrophe. The punishment for negligence was burial alive, for the flame was not just light, it was life. In Egypt, temples followed the rhythm of cosmos and river. In Karnak and Luxor, priests bathed the statues of gods, lit incense, and offered flame-fed libations each dawn. The sun itself was Ra's chariot, and sunrise was a ritual of resurrection. The eternal flame, though rarely visible, burned in the rituals that sustained the balance of all things. In Nubia, at sites like Jebel Barkal, fire altars and solar symbolism continued this devotion. In early Celtic Europe, hearth cults flourished, centered around Brigid, goddess of fire, healing, and poetry. At Kildare in Ireland, Her priestesses tended an eternal flame into the Christian era. Fire festivals, Beltane in bulk, transitions of season and spirit, where bonfires leaped skyward to honor gods and ancestors alike. Farther east, in the steppes and mountain ranges of Central Asia, fire played a central role in Scythian and Sarmatian funerary rituals. Pyres blazed for the dead, carrying souls upward. Shamans danced around sacred fires, inhaling smoke and speaking with spirits. Among the Siberian and Mongolic peoples, hearthfire was a living presence, never cursed, never stepped over, and marriage rites, oaths, and songs circled its warmth. In China, ancestor worship was linked to incense and fire. Offerings were burned so their smoke could rise to heaven. Paper money, miniature houses, horses, servants. In Confucian shrines and Taoist temples, incense sticks formed a bridge between worlds. The flame was reverence made visible. In Mesoamerica, fire was a god. In the Aztec world, Xiuhticutli ruled fire and time. In the Great New Fire ceremony, held every 52 years, all flames in the empire were extinguished and relit from a sacred hearth atop a mountain. This act reset the calendar, rebalanced the cosmos, and reaffirmed the sun's journey. Among the Inca fire rituals were tied to Inti, the sun god. In Cusco, golden sun discs reflected the divine light, and in sacred festivals, fire consumed offerings as a pact between earth and sky. In Polynesia, volcanoes were living deities. Peel in Hawaii raged with fire and creation. Her caldera was temple and altar, feared and worshipped. Fire symbolized both destruction and birth, a duality present in nearly every early religion. The first temples were not merely shelters for gods. They were designed to embody divine presence, geometry, orientation, elevation, and ritual action turned stone into sacred space. Whether it was the inner sanctum of a Mesopotamian ziggurat, the stepped precinct of a Mesoamerican pyramid, or the mountain-like contours of a Hindu mandir, the space magnified the fire within. Candles, torches, braziers, and lamps were placed to align with sunrises, equinoxes, and planetary cycles. The fire inside echoed the fire above. And so it continues in the eternal flames at Hiroshima and Arlington, in the Olympic torch passed hand to hand, in candles lit at vigils and prayers across the world. Flame is memory. Flame is promise. Flame is the bridge between what is and what was, and in the quiet spaces of night, when only a single candle flickers, we still gather to listen, to remember, and to feel that something greater walks beside us in the dark. Across the ancient world, death was never the end. It was a passage, a threshold, a transformation, watched over by gods and guided by rituals as old as memory. From the pyramids of Egypt to the tombs of China, from the bone towers of Neolithic Europe to the flower-strewn graves of Paleolithic hunters, every civilization sought to make peace with mortality. The dead were not discarded. They were honored, protected, and prepared for a journey into realms unseen. The underworld, shadowy, mysterious, and eternal, stood as both warning and promise. Its guardians were fierce, its trials many, and its landscapes rich with symbolic meaning. In Egypt, death was a journey through the Duat, a realm of night skies and riverways, where the soul, or Ba, passed through gates guarded by demons and serpents. The heart was weighed against the feather of Mat, goddess of truth, while Anubis, jackal-headed lord of embalming, presided over the ritual. If the heart was heavy with sin, it was devoured by Ammit, part lion, part crocodile. If it was light, the soul entered the field of reeds, a paradise of fertile lands and eternal sun. The Book of the Dead, inscribed on papyrus or tomb walls, provided spells and maps for this journey. Every amulet, every charm, every carefully placed organ in a canopic jar was a step in navigating the darkness. In Mesopotamia, death meant descent into Urkala, the land of no return. There, all souls, great and small, dwelled in silence, fed on dust and shadow. Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, ruled from a throne of stone, while her gatekeeper, Neti, demanded the names of those who dared approach. Even the gods were not exempt. The tale of Inanna's descent tells of how the goddess of love and war stripped herself of power and finery to enter her sister's domain, only to be slain and later revived, a cycle echoing seasons and sacrifice. In Greece, Hades ruled a world beneath the earth, where rivers flowed with memory, forgetfulness, and fire. Souls were ferried across the Styx by Charon, a grim boatman who demanded a coin often placed in the mouth of the dead. Cerberus, the three-headed hound, guarded the gates. The dead might linger in the asphodel meadows, wander the fields of Elysium, or be punished in Tartarus, where titans and traitors suffered endlessly. The mysteries of Eleusis, shrouded in secrecy, promised a gentler afterlife to initiates who reenacted the tale of Persephone, kidnapped into Hades, returned each spring. Her story echoed the rhythms of grain and grief, of dormancy and bloom among the Norse. The dead traveled to many realms, the glorious slain to Valhalla, where Odin feasted warriors beneath golden rafters. Others to Folkvanger, Freya's domain, and many to Hel, a cold gray land ruled by a goddess of the same name. Hell was neither heaven nor hell, but a somber resting place where the ancestors waited in stillness. Burial mounds, or barrows, were raised over chieftains and heroes, stocked with weapons, ships, animals, and servants for the voyage. In some cases, entire ships became tombs, like the Oseberg ship in Norway, where two noble women lay amid rich grave goods and carved sleighs. In early China, the afterlife was conceived as a mirror of the earthly realm, populated by ancestors, spirits, and celestial bureaucrats. Tombs of nobles from the Shang and Zhou dynasties contained chariots, jade suits, oracle bones, and ritual bronzes. The Qin emperor, who united China, built an empire in death. The terracotta army, thousands strong, stood ready to protect him in the hereafter. Taoist thought imagined a cosmic bureaucracy beyond death, complete with heavenly courts and immortal sages, while Buddhist influence introduced karma, reincarnation, and the 6 realms of rebirth. Death became not an end, but a turning, a karmic pivot in the wheel of existence. The Maya saw death as a return to Xibalba, the place of fear. A maze of rivers, traps, and demons awaited the soul. Yet death was also transformation. Maya rulers were seen as gods reborn, entering the cosmos through death. Tombs, such as that of Pakal the Great in Palenque, depicted the dead king's soul ascending the world tree, a great axis connecting earth, sky, and underworld. In the Andean world, the Inca mummified their rulers, seated them on thrones, dressed them in finery, and continued to consult them in state matters. Death did not sever the thread of rule, it extended it. Ancestors were fed. In festivals, life and death interwove in ritual and memory. In Japan, Shinto rites honored the kami of the dead ancestral spirits who could bless or curse. Burial mounds, called kofan, housed rulers beneath earth and stone, and the emperor's descent from Amaterasu, the sun goddess, imbued death with divine continuity. In the Pacific Islands, burial often involved stages, exposure to the elements, secondary burial, and the crafting of ancestor figures. Skulls were kept, painted, or embedded into ritual houses. The dead were not gone. They became guardians, spirits of place and kin. Among early Indo-Europeans, kurgan mounds rose over the steppes. Chariots, weapons, and drinking vessels accompanied the dead. Sacrifices, sometimes human, marked transitions of power and memory. In prehistoric Europe, the Neolithic long barrows and dolmens were chambers for the community dead. Stonehenge itself, before it was a solar calendar, may have begun as a burial ground. At Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, the dead were buried beneath homes, their bones painted, their skulls kept close. The ancestors lived beneath the hearth. Across Africa, burial practices varied widely, from the pyramids of Nubia to the elaborate tombs of the Igbo Kwu, where bronze, glass beads, and ritual objects marked the sacred status of the dead. In Madagascar, the Famidahana, the turning of the bones, brings ancestors from their tombs, rewrapped in fresh cloth, celebrated, danced with, and returned. It is not morbid, it is joyful. The living and dead share the same breath of being. In South Asia, cremation became central to Hindu practice. The funeral pyre on the Ghats of Varanasi, beside the Ganges, is a release, the soul, or Atman, freed to rejoin Brahman. In Buddhism, the body is an impermanent vessel. Monks in Tibet practiced sky burial, offering the body to vultures in an act of generosity, dissolving self into the cosmos. In Jainism, death is a final austerity. Some saints fast unto death, Salakana, as a peaceful exit from the world. These are not acts of despair, but of profound discipline. In the Americas, burial mounds, cliff tombs, and ceremonial caves held the remains of chiefs and shamans. The Mississippians built massive earthworks. The Nazca drew lines to guide the souls of the dead. In Oceania, the dead were returned to earth, sea, or fire, each culture shaping its rites to the land's rhythm. Fire burned away impurity. Water bore the soul. Earth embraced it. What all these traditions share is a refusal to let death be meaningless. It is ritualized, sanctified, narrated. The soul may face judgment, rebirth, or simply rest, but never does it vanish into nothing. We bury with care. We speak the names of the dead. We build tombs and temples, light candles, chant prayers, and place flowers. We carry the dead forward, in memory, in story, in bone and ash. The underworld has many names: Duat, Urkala, Hades, Shabalba, Hell, but it is always more than shadow. It is the place where meaning is made. The journey through death is also a journey through culture, belief, and hope. For as long as humans have walked this earth, they have walked beside death, and never alone. From the moment scattered tribes gathered into clans, and clans grew into kingdoms, humanity has asked a central question: who rules, and by what right? As cities emerged and temples rose, the world cried out for balance between power and principle, between the sword and the scroll. This chapter explores the origins of law, warfare, and governance, the people who enforced them, the texts that codified them, and the ideals they left behind. In ancient Sumer, law was not just imposed by kings. It was believed to descend from the heavens. The Code of Ur-Nammu, dating back to around 2100 BCE, laid out early standards for justice, later echoed in the famed Code of Hammurabi. Hammurabi, king of Babylon, blending justice with retribution, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. This was not mere punishment. It was a vision of cosmic fairness, balancing offense and response in the eyes of gods and men. As city-states evolved into empires, rulers used both myth and military to solidify their authority. In Egypt, the pharaoh was a living god, a divine intermediary, upholding order, truth, and harmony. Army generals and scribes alike answered to his commands. Temples, tombs, and stelae proclaimed victories and decrees, blending conquest with divine sanction. In India, Dharma served as the binding force of law and society. The Arthashastra, attributed to Kautilya, advisor to Chandragupta Maurya, was a treatise on statecraft, espionage, war, and economics, predating Machiavelli by centuries. Here, rulers were expected to be both ruthless and righteous, guarding their realms through diplomacy, intrigue, and, when needed, force. The great emperor Ashoka, after the bloody Kalinga War, turned away from violence and embraced Buddhist ethics, inscribing edicts on pillars and rocks across his empire, advocating compassion, tolerance, and moral governance. In China, the mandate of heaven was the celestial license to rule. Dynasties claimed this mandate, but if they grew corrupt or failed in virtue, heaven would withdraw its favor. The Zhou dynasty emphasized this moral accountability, while the legalist reforms of the Qin imposed harsh discipline to maintain order. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, centralized power, standardized weights, measures, and scripts, and ruled through an iron bureaucracy. Yet, Confucianism, advocating filial piety, ritual propriety, and virtuous leadership, soon tempered this rigidity. Confucius taught that a ruler's strength came not from coercion, but from moral example. His Analects became a foundational scroll for governance in East Asia for 2 millennia. In the Mediterranean, Greece offered experiments in law and liberty. Athens birthed democracy, albeit limited to free male citizens, where the assembly debated policy and juries could number in the hundreds. Solon's reforms balanced elite and common interests, while Draco's laws, though severe, introduced codified justice. Sparta, by contrast, valued discipline, order, and military excellence. Above all, its laws, attributed to the legendary Lycurgus, forged a society where every citizen was a soldier, trained from childhood, living in barracks, obedient to the state. The contrast between Athens and Sparta became symbolic of 2 visions of society: liberty and law versus duty and discipline. Rome would blend them. From its founding myths, Romulus, Remus, and the Sabine women, to the republican debates in the Forum and the imperial pronouncements of Caesar and Augustus, Rome evolved a legal system that became the bedrock of Western law. The 12 Tables, inscribed in bronze in the 5th century BCE, protected the rights of plebeians and outlined contracts, property, and criminal penalties. As the empire grew, law became a tool of unification. Latin legal terms echo today in courts from London to Manila. Roman citizenship, extended strategically, tied conquered peoples into a web of rights and duties. The Praetorian Guard, Senate, and emperors each played their part in a delicate and often bloody dance of power in Africa. Empires like Mali, Ghana, and Songhai rose on both trade and tradition. Mansa Musa, famed for his pilgrimage to Mecca, governed a vast realm rich in gold and knowledge. Timbuktu's libraries housed texts on law, astronomy, and philosophy. Oral traditions, like the Griot, preserved histories of lawgivers and warriors alike, while councils of elders and Islamic judges, qadis, mediated justice. In Ethiopia, the Kebra Nagast justified royal descent from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, merging Christian and Solomonic traditions into the fabric of political authority. The Fetha Nagast, or Law of the Kings, served as a Christian legal code for centuries. In the Islamic world, the Quran and Hadith became scrolls of divine law. Sharia, derived from them, encompassed not only criminal and civil codes but also spiritual and ethical guidance. Scholars debated fiqh jurisprudence in the great academies of Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba. Caliphs ruled as both spiritual and temporal leaders, with military commanders, judges, and viziers carrying out governance. The Abbasids, in particular, fostered an environment of learning where legal theory flourished alongside science, poetry, and philosophy. Crusaders and Mongols might shake the Islamic world's foundations, but its legal traditions endured. In the Americas, law and war were also entwined. The Aztecs maintained order through military dominance, tribute systems, and a complex legal structure. Laws governed theft, adultery, drunkenness, and tribute. Warriors ascended through valor in battle, while judges oversaw disputes and penalties. The Inca employed a quipu system, knotted strings, to record taxes, census, and possibly laws. Their vast road networks and messenger systems allowed swift communication and enforcement across the Andes. Justice was often restorative. Criminals might pay reparations or labor in service of the state. Even among so-called tribal societies, law was no less complex. Among the Iroquois Confederacy, the Great Law of Peace formed a sophisticated system of governance balancing clan, council, and collective decision-making, influencing even the framers of the U.S. Constitution. Polynesian societies governed through tapu, sacred law, which defined behavior, taboo, and punishment. In Oceania, Melanesian big men earned authority through negotiation, generosity, and influence, not heredity alone. Justice was woven into custom. And what of the sword? Warriors shaped the fate of nations, from chariot riders on the steppes to hoplites in Greek phalanxes, from Persian immortals to Zulu impis, from samurai in Japan to knights in medieval Europe. Military codes became moral codes. The samurai followed Bushido, the way of the warrior, stressing loyalty, honor, and discipline. European knights swore fealty and followed chivalry, though not always in practice. In Africa, the warrior queens of Dahomey trained in battle and served as royal guard. In India, the Rajput code of honor, the Sikh Khalsa's warrior saints, and the Maratha rebels all embodied a fusion of spiritual duty and military might. Lawgivers and warriors are not opposites, they are complements. Together, they define the soul of civilization, one restraining chaos with rules, the other defending order with courage. The scroll teaches what is right, the sword defends it. When in balance, they bring justice and peace. When one dominates, tyranny or anarchy follows. Across continents and centuries, humanity has searched for that balance, and in doing so, carved the pillars of our shared past. Before history was ever recorded in ink, it was sung in verse and carved in stone, whispered through wind-worn valleys and traced along sacred symbols. Humanity's longing to preserve memory gave birth not just to script, but to literature, the echo of thought made tangible across time. The first forms of writing emerged not from the minds of poets, but from the hands of accountants and priests. In the fertile plains of Sumer, cuneiform arose from clay, etched with a reed stylus to track grain, cattle, and offerings to gods. But over centuries, mundane marks blossomed into epic tales. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest literary works on earth, tells of a warrior king who defies death, battles divine creatures, and journeys to the edge of the world. He fails to find immortality, yet his story endures, the paradox at the heart of literature. Through Gilgamesh, the ancients spoke of grief, friendship, kingship, and cosmic fate in ancient Egypt. Literature was both spiritual and practical. Hieroglyphs danced across temple walls, tombs, and scrolls of papyrus. Wisdom literature flourished, such as the maxims of Tehotep, which taught humility, patience, and ethical conduct. Meanwhile, mythic tales like the story of Isis and Osiris gave voice to eternal cycles of life, death, and rebirth. In the tale of Sinis, a court official flees Egypt, finds refuge among foreigners, and returns home in old age, a parable of identity and belonging. These narratives were read aloud by scribes, remembered in hearts, and entombed with kings in the Indus Valley. A script still undeciphered teases scholars with glimpses of lost wisdom. But in Vedic India, the oral tradition carried the sacred word with reverence. The Rigveda, composed in precise Sanskrit meters, was memorized and recited for generations before it was ever inked. These hymns to fire, dawn, and cosmic order wove mythology with metaphysics. Later texts, like the Mahabharata and Ramayana, expanded into vast epics, threading gods and mortals into narratives of dharma and destiny. The Bhagavad Gita, a single chapter of the Mahabharata, stands as a philosophical dialogue on duty, action, and the soul. Across the Yellow River Basin, oracle bones from the Shang dynasty preserve early Chinese script used to divine the will of ancestors and deities. Over time, these glyphs gave rise to literary classics. Confucian texts, like the Analects, offered moral guidance rooted in ritual and hierarchy. The Book of Songs compiled over 300 lyrical pieces about war, harvest, love, and longing, fragments of daily life elevated to verse. Later poets like Ku Yuan and Tao Yuanming crafted reflections on exile, nature, and human sorrow. In the Tang dynasty, poetry reached golden heights with Li Bai's celestial metaphors and Du Fu's somber realism, forming a bridge between the temporal and the transcendent. In the Levant, the Hebrew Bible recorded an unfolding narrative of divine covenant, law, exile, and redemption. From the sweeping genealogies of Genesis to the lamentations of Jeremiah and the poetic cadence of Psalms, this anthology captured both historical memory and spiritual yearning. Proverbs distilled practical wisdom. Job wrestled with the problem of suffering. The Song of Songs celebrated erotic and divine love. These texts were copied, recited, and revered, becoming the backbone of later Abrahamic literatures. Greek letters, adapted from Phoenician traders, birthed a literary explosion. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, initially oral epics, captured the rage of Achilles, the wanderings of Odysseus, and the interventions of meddling gods. These works did not merely entertain, they instructed, offering archetypes of heroism, hospitality, and hubris. Hesiod's Theogony laid out the genealogy of gods, while his works and days offered a farmer's calendar interspersed with moral teachings. Tragedians like Sophocles and Euripides used drama to probe fate and justice. Philosophers like Plato blended story and dialogue, and historians like Herodotus and Thucydides began shaping fact from memory. Rome inherited and transformed the Greek literary legacy. Virgil's Aeneid offered imperial Rome its mythic origin in the piety of Aeneas. Ovid's Metamorphoses wove together myths of transformation into a single poetic current, inspiring centuries of painters and playwrights. Seneca's Stoic essays and Cicero's rhetorical treatises established prose as a vehicle for political and ethical reflection. Roman literature became a tool of empire, educating citizens and unifying a diverse world through Latin. Further east, the Sanskrit tales of the Panchatantra taught wisdom through animal fables, influencing stories from Arabia to Europe. In Persia, Ferdowsi's Shahnameh chronicled the mythical and historical kings of Iran, preserving language and identity after conquest. Umar Khayyam, a polymath poet, distilled existential wonder into quatrains. Rumi, writing in Persian during the 13th century, whirled poetry and mysticism into timeless couplets that danced between love and divine union. Arabic literature soared on the wings of the Quran, a revelation praised for its unparalleled eloquence. This sacred text shaped the cadence of Arabic poetry, birthing a golden age of verse and prose. The Mu'allaqat, suspended in the Kaaba, celebrated honor, desert life, and lost love. Al-Jahiz wrote of animals, ideas, and language with wit and curiosity. In Al-Andalus, philosophers, poets, and scientists flourished. And in the East, 1001 Nights spun tales of adventure, morality, and imagination. Scheherazade told stories to stay alive, and in doing so, gave life to literature. In Africa, oral epics and praise poetry carried history through generations. The Epic of Sundiata, sung by griots in Mali, recounted the founding of an empire and the triumph of fate. In Ethiopia, the Kebra Nagast blended Solomon's wisdom with national identity. Folktales, proverbs, and riddles, woven into daily speech, offered both instruction and delight. In the Americas, the Popol Vuh of the Maya recorded cosmic battles and the origin of humanity, while the Mexica Aztecs wrote hymns and histories. In Nahuatl, adorned with vivid metaphor, Codices, painted on bark, folded history, myth, and prophecy into sacred art in Japan. The Kojiki and Nihon Shoki preserved myths of divine descent and imperial lineage. Poetry anthologies, like the Man-Yoshu and the later Koken Wakashk, elevated Tonka, short poems, into expressions of seasons, courtship, and transience. Murasaki Shikibu's Tale of Genji, written in the Heian court, offered an introspective, psychological novel long before such a form existed elsewhere. In Korea, the Samguk Yusa preserved Buddhist and native legends, while in Vietnam, the rise of Chia NM allowed folk poetry and satire to flourish. Even in places without written language, literature thrived. In Polynesia, chants and genealogies were memorized with precision, connecting people to ancestors and cosmos. In the Arctic, Inuit elders told tales of Raven and Sedna, weaving survival with spirit. Aboriginal Australians passed down dreamtime stories that embedded creation in landscape. Everywhere, story was sacred, whether inked on scrolls, carved in stone, painted on walls, or spoken into night winds. Literature became a second soul, enduring where bodies fail. These ancient texts, voices in the dust, whisper still. They speak of longing, of law, of gods and gardens, heroes and hearths, grief and grace. Through them, the past is never silent. Through them, we are never alone. From the moment ancient peoples first walked the earth, they walked not only to survive, they walked to seek. Pilgrimage is among the most enduring expressions of human devotion, wonder, and longing. It is a journey not for conquest, but for connection with gods, with ancestors, with truth. In this chapter, we follow the sacred roads of the ancient world, from the craggy peaks of the Himalayas to the deserts of Sinai, from the vast boulevards of Teotihuacan to the winding paths of Celtic Britain. We begin with the earliest footprints of faith, processional avenues leading to megalithic monuments like Stonehenge in England or Newgrange in Ireland. These were not mere burial sites, but astronomical temples aligned with solstice light. Every step toward them was a ritual, every stone a signpost in a sacred landscape in Egypt. The road between Karnak and Luxor, lined with sphinxes, formed the grand axis of religious life. Traversed during the Opet festival as statues of Amen, Mut, and Khonsu sailed on barks amid song and incense. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats were approached by stairways and ramps, symbolizing ascent from earth to heaven. Pilgrimage was embedded in their architecture. In the Levant, pilgrims ascended to Jerusalem, whose name itself may mean foundation of peace. For ancient Jews, the journey to the temple during Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuot was both obligation and joy. Psalms of ascent were sung en route, invoking divine presence with every elevation. In the world of early Hinduism and Buddhism, the sacred geography of India gave rise to a dense network of pilgrimage centers, from Varanasi on the Ganges, where cremation fires release the soul, to the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, where Siddhartha attained enlightenment. Mountains like Kailash, rivers like Yamuna, cities like Haridwar, and confluences like Prayag became tirthas, spiritual fords, where the mortal touched the eternal. Pilgrims bathed, fasted, circumambulated temples, and carried water, fire, or ash for blessings. The Kumbh Mela, dating back millennia, remains the largest pilgrimage on earth, Buddhism exported the idea of sacred journey far beyond India. Pilgrims traveled the Silk Road to visit relics, stupas, and monasteries. In China, Xuanzang's 7th century journey to Nalanda was both scholarly and spiritual, returning with hundreds of texts that helped shape East Asian Buddhism. Japan developed its own pilgrimage routes, like the 88-temple Shikaku Trail and the Kumano-Kodo, a mountainous path walked by emperors, monks, and commoners alike. Shrines, waterfalls, forests, all held kami, the sacred, in the Greco-Roman world. Pilgrims traveled to Delphi to consult the oracle, to Eleusis for the mystery rites of Demeter and Persephone, or to Epidaurus for healing at the temple of The act of travel itself was transformative, fasting, purifying, dreaming, and being reborn. The Maya, Aztecs, and other Mesoamerican peoples built sacred roads called sakbib, white limestone paths that linked ceremonial centers. Pilgrimage sites like Cholula, with its massive pyramid, or the island of the Dolls near Tenochtitlan, bore witness to long ritualized journeys filled with music, flowers, and offerings. The Inca constructed the Capac-On, the Royal Road, spanning over 20,000 miles, uniting their empire through relay runners and processions that honored the sun god Inti and the mountain spirits, called Apis. High-altitude sanctuaries, where children were sacrificed in Copa-Coca rituals, became points of convergence between sky, earth, and spirit. In Arabia, long before Islam, tribes journeyed to the Kaaba in Mecca, where idols of many gods stood. After the revelations to Muhammad, the Hajj became one of the 5 pillars of Islam, a profound reenactment of Abraham's submission and Hagar's desperate search for water. Pilgrims don white ihram garments, walk the tawaf around the Kaaba, run between hills, and gather at Mount Arafat in the largest annual gathering of humans on earth. Every gesture echoes ancient stories. In medieval Europe, pilgrimage was a central religious act. From Canterbury to Santiago de Compostela, from Chartres to Rome, travelers carried scallop shells, wore pilgrim badges, and followed stars, literally and metaphorically, toward salvation. The road was as vital as the destination. In Africa, pilgrimages were often to ancestral shrines, sacred groves, or Islamic centers, like Timbuktu. In Ethiopia, Christians still make arduous climbs to rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, carved from living stone. Pilgrims crawl through tunnels, kiss crosses, and emerge into sunlight. In animist traditions, sacred geography mapped the invisible, where water spirits lived, where ancestors whispered through trees. Dance, music, and procession marked each step. In Oceania, journeying between islands could itself be sacred. Wayfinding was not only navigation, but spiritual communion. The stars above mirrored paths below. In Hawaii, sacred sites such as Pu Owanwa Ohanonau offered sanctuary and transformation, blending political, ecological, and spiritual meaning. Pilgrimage is the lived poetry of belief. It weaves body and spirit, place and purpose. The pilgrim is a bridge walker crossing borders of terrain, identity, and time. Though the gods may differ, the impulse is shared: to walk, to search, to arrive, and to be changed. Even now, in a world of machines and maps, people still walk to Mecca, to Machu Picchu, to Jerusalem, to Lourdes, to the source of the Ganges, to shrines unknown. The footsteps echo older ones, the road remembers, the sacred path endures. Before humans built pyramids or raised great walls, they looked upward. The night sky, vast and constant, became the first clock, the first temple, the first map. Chapter 9 is a journey, not through geography, but through the heavens, as seen, tracked, and revered by the ancient world. We explore the birth of calendars, the alignment of monuments with stars, and the myths woven into constellations. These were not only scientific endeavors, but sacred acts, the attempt to understand one's place in a cosmos governed by rhythm, cycles, and celestial power. In the darkness, people found light. In Mesopotamia, Babylonian astronomers watched the skies from ziggurat towers, recording the movement of Venus, Mars, and the moon. Their observations filled cuneiform tablets with star charts and lunar omens, giving rise to the zodiac and the earliest horoscopes. They aligned cities and temples with solstices and equinoxes, believing divine will flowed from the heavens. The Sumerian calendar divided time into 12 lunar months, establishing a ritual rhythm still echoed in modern systems. In Egypt, sky and state were inseparable. The heliacal rising of Sirius, heralding the Nile's flood, determined the Egyptian New Year. Temples like Karnak and Abu Simbel were oriented toward solstices or specific stars, their inner sanctuaries lit by shafts of sunlight only on certain days. Nut, the sky goddess, arched protectively over the earth. God, Geb, pharaohs became stars in death, their souls sailing across the sky in solar boats. Astronomical ceilings, such as that of Sennemut's tomb, mapped constellations with exquisite precision. The Maya, masters of celestial mathematics, developed intricate calendars blending solar, lunar, and Venus cycles. The 260-day Dizokan and the 365-day Hab interlocked in a 52-year calendar round. Their long count system charted epochs spanning thousands of years. Observatories like El Caracol in Chichen Itza tracked equinoxes, eclipses, and solstices. Their codices, though few survived conquest, reveal a vision of time that was cyclical, sacred, and alive. In their mythology, each era ended in catastrophe, followed by renewal. In China, astronomy was integral to the mandate of heaven. Emperors employed court astronomers to read omens in comets and eclipses. The Chinese lunisolar calendar marked seasonal festivals like the solstice-based Dongzi or the Lunar New Year. Observatories in the Han Dynasty recorded planetary conjunctions with surprising accuracy. The stars were not distant, but dynastic, their balance reflecting harmony or chaos in the realm below. Star names, constellations, and the celestial pole all shifted as dynasties rose and fell. The Greeks saw gods in the stars: Orion, the hunter; Andromeda, the chained maiden; Ares, the ram of sacrifice. But they also sought logic. Ptolemy's Almagest compiled centuries of Greek and Babylonian star knowledge. Hipparchus and Aristarchus debated heliocentrism. In Alexandria, Eratosthenes measured the Earth's circumference using only shadows and geometry. Yet even in scientific Greece, myth clung to the heavens. The constellations became eternal stories, written in light. Further east, in India, Jyotisha Vedic astrology viewed time as an unfolding divine pattern. The nakshatras, or lunar mansions, divided the sky into 27 segments, guiding rituals, marriages, and festivals. timekeeping merged with Dharma. The Surya Siddhanta described planetary motion with staggering accuracy. In Angkor Wat, Cambodia's Khmer architects built temple complexes that mirrored the movement of the sun and moon. Stairways aligned with solstice, shadows, and equinox light. It was a spiritual astronomy rendered in stone. The Aboriginal peoples of Australia mapped the sky in dark space, tracing the Milky Way's shadows to form the emu in the sky. Their seasonal calendars were rooted in the stars, with each group developing unique sky lore linking terrestrial activity to celestial markers. In Polynesia, wayfinders used the stars to navigate across vast oceans, memorizing star paths, ocean swells, and wind patterns, their minds charting maps long before compasses existed. Celtic and Druidic practices in ancient Britain left behind. Stone circles, like Stonehenge and Callanish, aligned to solstices and lunar standstills. These were not only calendrical tools, but ritual grounds. The festival of Samhain marked both a seasonal change and a thinning of the veil between worlds. Time was mythic. Among the Norse, Ragnarok was both an end and a cosmic reset, foretold by signs in the sky. The ash tree Yggdrasil connected realms, including those of stars and spirits. Islamic astronomers during the Golden Age, from Al-Battani to Ulugh Beg, built observatories and developed astrolabes. They calculated prayer times, lunar months, and the Qibla direction with precision. Their models refined Greek astronomy and laid foundations for later European advances. In Christian Europe, monastic calendars synchronized saints' feast days with seasonal cycles. Gothic cathedrals incorporated solar alignments like Chartres, where sunlight hits the labyrinth on feast days. Across all these cultures, calendars were not just for agriculture or ritual, they were worldviews. The measurement of time shaped identity, grounded civilizations, and allowed the prediction of future blessings or doom. Time was divine music, heard in eclipses, solstices, planetary dances, and solar risings. And even now, we carry echoes of that ancient stargazing in our calendars, our horoscopes, our holidays. The stars still whisper, the cosmos still turns, and the ancient wisdom remains written in the sky. Beneath the soil of ruined cities and across the wind-carved deserts, evidence of humanity's first great networks lies waiting. Broken amphorae, stamped coins, lapis beads, and bits of silk. Trade was not just commerce, it was connection, communication, and collision. Long before the modern idea of globalization, ancient civilizations were weaving a fabric that spanned continents. In Chapter 10, we follow these invisible threads, charting the rise of transcontinental trade, imperial ambition, and cultural exchange. From the Silk Roads to the sea lanes of the Mediterranean and the spice trails of South Asia, we trace how goods, ideas, religions, and even diseases traveled, and how empires rose and fell upon these currents. In the Fertile Crescent, Sumerians traded grain, textiles, and bitumen as early as 3000 BCE. Seals found in the Indus Valley suggest a thriving exchange with Mesopotamia. Harappan merchants may have sailed the Persian Gulf with ivory, cotton, and semi-precious stones. Along these routes, not only goods moved, but stories, gods, and technologies. Bronze weapons, chariot design, and writing systems spread through contact as much as conquest. In the Mediterranean, the Phoenicians were the great mariners of their age. From Tyre and Sidon, they sailed to Spain, North Africa, and possibly beyond. They traded purple, dye, timber, and glass. Their greatest export, however, may have been their alphabet, a system that became the seed of Greek, Latin, Arabic, and Hebrew scripts. The Assyrian and Persian empires built infrastructure to hold their realms together: roads, couriers, and standardized measures. The royal road of Persia stretched over 1,600 miles, linking Susa to Sardis, patrolled and serviced for royal messengers and merchants alike. Darius the Great's empire was not just ruled by sword, but by connectivity. In Greece, the Delian League fostered a maritime network powered by tribute and trade. Athens prospered through silver, pottery, and olives, while Sparta remained landlocked and austere. The Roman Empire epitomized imperial logistics. Roman roads crisscrossed Europe, Africa, and the Near East. Aqueducts, bridges, ports, and tax stations made the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum our sea. From Britannia to Egypt, Roman coins standardized currency, while amphorae carried wine and oil. The Silk Road brought Chinese silk westward, while Roman glass made its way east. Alongside goods came Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Christianity, and eventually plague. In Han China, imperial expansion brought the western regions into the orbit of Luoyang and Chang'an. The Chinese exported silk, tea, and porcelain, importing horses, wool, and jade. The diplomat Zhang Qian opened the way for east-west contact. His journeys remembered as heroic milestones. In Africa, Nubia, and later, the Kingdom of Aksum controlled key Red Sea routes. Gold, ivory, and incense were traded across the Sahara via camel caravans, linking West Africa to North Africa and the Mediterranean world. Timbuktu would later rise as a center of learning and commerce. In the Indian subcontinent, ports like Lothal, later Baruch, and Muciras connected inland kingdoms to the broader Indian Ocean network. Spices, gems, and textiles traveled east and west, carried by monsoon winds that traders had mastered over generations. Arab merchants played pivotal roles as middlemen. Before Islam, Meccan caravans crisscrossed the Arabian Peninsula. Afterward, the Islamic caliphates unified trade from Spain to Central Asia. Arabic became the lingua franca of commerce. Baghdad, Cairo, and Cordoba blossomed as economic and intellectual hubs. Paper from China enabled the growth of libraries and record-keeping. Jewish, Persian, Indian, and Arab traders cooperated and competed, tying disparate regions into one commercial web in the Americas. While there was no contact with Afro-Eurasia, civilizations still formed vast trade networks. The Inca used runners along the Capac-One to transmit goods and messages. Potatoes, maize, textiles, and coca leaves moved from highlands to coast. In Mesoamerica, the Mexica Aztecs controlled tribute routes, while long-distance merchants, called Pachteca, carried cacao, jade, obsidian, and feathers across Central America. Canoes plied rivers and coastlines, while sacred markets served as both economic and ritual centers. Trade was not always peaceful. Empires expanded through conquest as much as commerce. Alexander the Great spread Hellenism by sword, marrying Persian customs with Greek ideals. The Mongols under Genghis Khan reconnected east and west through brutal force, but also protected caravans, built roads, and encouraged science and exchange. Their empire linked the Islamic world with China and Europe in ways never seen before. From these threads came much of what we recognize as the ancient world, globalized long before the modern term. Goods carried ideas, ideas carried change, and every empire, no matter how vast, depended on the flow of food, metal, coin, and belief. In these ancient networks, we see the roots of our own and the timeless truth that humanity has always reached beyond borders, seeking connection. To understand the rhythm of ancient civilization, we must step not only into its temples and thrones, but into its kitchens, markets, and workshops. History is not only written by kings or chanted by priests, it is also lived by weavers, bakers, shepherds, scribes, mothers, children, all who moved through daily life in forgotten villages and mighty capitals alike. In Chapter 11, we enter the world of the everyday, where sacred and profane intertwined, where labor and leisure danced in harmony with the seasons, and where even the smallest routines echoed the cosmos. In Mesopotamia, life was structured around the twin rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. Fields were irrigated by canals, and the calendar revolved around sowing and harvest. Clay tablets record inventories of barley and beer, along with prayers to gods for fertility and rain. Families lived in mud brick homes. In cities like Ur and Babylon, communal ovens baked bread for neighborhoods. Children learned cuneiform in scribal schools. Women wove textiles and managed households. Religion was not separate from daily life. Household gods were honored at home altars, and each task had its ritual. In Egypt, most people lived in villages of reed huts or mud brick houses. The Nile dictated life, its flood brought new soil, and its rhythm governed labor. Farmers planted wheat and flax, raised ducks and cattle, and fished the river with nets. Women brewed beer and ground grain with stone tools. Children played with dolls made of clay or wood. Markets bustled with traders, and festivals like Opet brought color and song to Thebes. Even tomb paintings show laughter and feasts, dance and work, giving us glimpses of ordinary joys. The Indus Valley cities, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, reveal advanced urban planning, grid streets, drainage, and wells in nearly every home. Though their writing remains undeciphered, artifacts speak volumes: toys, combs, game pieces, and tiny weights. Seals depict animals, trade goods, and possibly deities. Public baths suggest cleanliness had spiritual significance. Life here was balanced between public order and private comfort, between earthly function and ritual form. In ancient China, village and family were the core of life. Ancestor worship guided daily rituals. Each home maintained a shrine. Farmers tended millet, rice, and tea, while artisans crafted jade, silk, and bronze. The extended family was an economic and social unit. Children were taught filial piety. Life was structured, but not austere. Music, poetry, and calligraphy were forms of joy and discipline. Festivals like the Moon Festival or Spring Festival marked time with lanterns, sweets, and prayer. In Greece, citizens of the polis participated in agriculture, trade, and politics. Men gathered in the agora to debate, while women tended homes and wove cloth. Children were taught myths, music, and gymnastics. Slaves, though vital to the economy, had little agency. Religion was everywhere, in kitchen shrines, city festivals, and solemn processions. Even philosophy emerged from daily dialogues, Socrates wandering the streets, asking questions. The sacred and mundane constantly overlapped. In Rome, daily life varied greatly between patricians and plebeians. The wealthy dined on oysters, peacocks, and spiced wine. The poor ate bread, lentils, and garum sauce. Baths, both private and public, served as social centers. Romans valued order and cleanliness. Homes had atriums with rainwater pools and household gods, Lares and Penates, honored at hearths. Markets sold olives, garlands, and scrolls. The calendar was crowded with festivals. Life was public and theatrical. Even grief had formal rituals. Among the Maya, daily life was rooted in maize. Corn was more than food, it was sacred. Men farmed with stone tools. Women ground maize into masa for tortillas and tamales. Children learned crafts and stories. Homes were made of thatch and mud. The calendar shaped action, planting, weaning, naming. Offerings were made to forest spirits. Sweat baths cleansed body and soul. Life was deeply interwoven with myth and astronomy in sub-Saharan Africa. Societies like those in ancient Ghana or Nok were built on farming, ironwork, and oral tradition. Community was central. Elders taught proverbs, songs, and ancestral history. Music was essential. Drums, flutes, and voice structured both work and celebration. Griots preserved knowledge across generations. Sacred groves and rites of passage guided spiritual life. Even labor, farming, weaving, smithing, was seen as divine craft across the ancient Americas. From the Andes to the Mississippi, life was similarly rooted in land and sky. The Inca managed communal lands, raised llamas, and celebrated in Rami in honor of the sun. In North America, mound-building cultures like the Mississippians created ceremonial centers and grew squash, beans, and maize. Daily life was communal, seasonal, and spiritual. Domestic tools, songs, and customs were handed down with reverence. Everywhere the sacred was not confined to temples. It was embedded in the sweep of the broom, the shaping of clay, the rhythm of song. Life was not divided but whole, a daily liturgy of light, labor, and love. And so, in kitchens and fields, in baths and workshops, beneath stars and beside hearths, the ancient world lived. Quietly, enduringly, these were the hands that built pyramids and temples, the feet that marched roads and tilled soil, the sacred and the profane, forever twined in the gentle hush of human memory. In the final chapter of this journey, we descend into the twilight of the ancient world, a time when the great civilizations faltered, fell, or transformed beyond recognition. But collapse in history is not merely an end. It is the reshaping of memory, the transmission of wisdom, and the quiet germination of legacy. This is not a story of silence, but of echoes, the sounds of temples crumbling, of libraries burning, of foreign tongues filling familiar streets, but also the sound of storytellers preserving what was lost, of monks copying forgotten texts, and of new cultures rising upon ancient foundations. The fall of the Western Roman Empire is often cited as a civilizational collapse, but even as Rome was sacked in 410 CE by Alaric the Visigoth, Its spirit continued in Constantinople, in the church, in law codes and Latin alphabets. Aqueducts fell silent, cities emptied, roads crumbled. But Roman ideas endured, in the architecture of cathedrals, in the governance of medieval Europe, in the very names of the months. Collapse is more complex than disappearance. In Mesopotamia, centuries of conquest wore down the old Sumerian and Akkadian cities. Assyrians rose and fell. Babylon thrived under Nebuchadnezzar, only to become a Persian province and later vanish under Hellenistic and Parthian rule. Yet their myths persisted: the flood story, the zodiac, the Tower of Babel. Their cuneiform script vanished, but the stories it held found new life in scriptures and legends. The Indus Valley civilization faded mysteriously, whether due to climate change, shifting rivers, or internal decay. But the cultural DNA lived on in the Vedic peoples who followed. Religious continuity, linguistic echoes, and agricultural techniques carried forward pieces of Harappan life into Indian civilization. The collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations around 1200 BCE is one of history's most profound ruptures. Mycenaeans, Hittites, and Ugarit disappeared in fire and chaos, possibly due to a combination of drought, invasion, and economic disruption. The Sea Peoples are often blamed, yet remain shadowy. Out of this dark age, new powers emerged. Greece would rebuild and redefine itself through Homeric epics, a cultural rebirth forged in memory. The Maya, too, experienced collapse, especially in the southern lowlands. Once thriving cities like Tikal and Copan were abandoned. Warfare, environmental stress, and elite rivalry likely played roles, yet the Maya never vanished. In the highlands and beyond, their traditions endured. Millions still speak Mayan languages and practice syncretic rituals rooted in ancient worldview. The fall of Angkor in Cambodia, of Great Zimbabwe in Africa, of Teotihuacan in Mesoamerica, all follow a similar pattern. Cities emptied, monuments overgrown, rulers forgotten. But the people did not vanish. Their descendants adapted. Their myths persisted. Their ruins inspired. With the fall of empires came the rise of memory keepers. Monks in Irish cloisters preserved Roman and Greek manuscripts. Islamic scholars in Baghdad's House of Wisdom translated, copied, and enhanced ancient texts. In China, Confucian classics were recopied across dynasties, keeping social order tied to ancient philosophy. African griots passed down genealogies. In the Andes, quipus continued to record data long after cities crumbled. Even ruins shaped imaginations. Roman amphitheaters became quarries and monasteries. Mayan pyramids were overgrown by jungle and feared as haunted hills. Stonehenge was misunderstood and mythologized. The past was never dead, only sleeping, and perhaps the most enduring legacies were intangible. The concept of time measured by stars. The city as a sacred space, the rule of law, writing, ritual, music, each had ancient roots. Each survives. In the hush of collapse, seeds of renewal quietly took root. The Renaissance was a rebirth of ancient ideals. The Enlightenment drank deeply from Greek thought. Modern nations shaped their identities through ancient myths. Rome for Italy, Egypt for the Arab world, Inca and Maya for Latin America. Even now, archaeology revives these worlds, not to mourn, but to understand. So we end where we began, with stories. Not because they are false, but because they are how we remember. Myth, memory, ruin, rebirth, the great circle continues. The ancients are not gone. They whisper in our language, echo in our laws, sleep in our cities. And as you drift deeper into sleep, know that your dreams share the same quiet roads once walked by gods, kings, poets, and peasants. They live on, not in monuments, but in you. And now, as our journey draws to a close, you find yourself in the gentle space between waking and dreaming, where memory and myth blur like fog over forgotten ruins. Tonight, you have wandered through temples and tombs, walked the dusty roads of lost cities, and listened to the whispers of gods and kings whose names once echoed across marble halls and mountain valleys. The empires have crumbled, their banners faded, their walls worn by wind and rain, but something of them remains, in the starlight, in the silence, in you. History is not only a record of events, it is the deep breath of continuity, a dream told from voice to voice across the centuries. The ancients are not gone. They rest beneath your feet, live in your languages, and breathe through your stories. The tools they forged, the laws they wrote, the myths they told, all flow quietly in the rivers of your mind, whether you know them or not. And so, as you drift toward sleep, let their memory hold you. Let the hush of time wrap you like linen, like parchment, like the soft dust of a buried chamber. The journey does not end. In dreams, you may yet return to walk again among the pyramids, to listen at Delphi, to share bread in the shadow of a ziggurat. Time sleeps, but it listens, and it waits for dreamers like you. If you've enjoyed this quiet voyage across the ages, consider becoming a guardian of the past and a companion for future journeys. Gently tap the like button, not with a warrior's sword, but with a historian's quill, and subscribe to our channel to open the gates to more ancient worlds, whispered legends, and soft histories meant for dreamers just like you. New episodes await, where forgotten voices rise once more beneath the stars. Good night, traveler of the ancient world. Rest well.